Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya is the greatest UFC rivalry of all time. Yeah, I said it. Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya is the greatest rivalry in UFC history and might be one of the greatest sagas in UFC history as well. This weekend, Alex Pereira pulled off the previously unthinkable and became a double champ in 7 fights by knocking out Yuri Prochazka, also becoming the new light heavyweight champion of the world. If you want an in-depth video about his career in the UFC and the things he has accomplished in a short period of time, check out last week's video. But with this win, he has solidified himself as one of the greatest combat sports athletes of all time. But what really stood out to me in this event was the post-fight interview. Alex Pereira in this interview, and this is a translation I found online, said that he wanted to defend his belt against Israel Adesanya, the guy that motivated him and rescued Alex out of the bar to do great things in the UFC. He continued to say that it would be a waste of talent if Izzy didn't fight until 2027, and that Izzy rescued him, and this time he wants to rescue Izzy. And with that line, that's when it hit me. This is the greatest UFC rivalry of all time. And yeah, that's a bold statement considering we've had rivalries like John Jones versus DC, Khabib versus Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz versus Conor McGregor, but I'm here to say and try to prove that Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya is the best rivalry in UFC history and quite possibly in all of combat sports. And it may have not been as heated and drama-filled as the other 3 I mentioned, but I would say in terms of a perfect storyline, 2 perfect foils, the lines between good and bad guy being blurred and even switched, character evolution and devolution, and enemies turning into friends, this is literally akin to a movie script. And if we're talking Izzy, this is literally the Aang and Zuko timeline, except Aang didn't jerk off Momo. I'm joking. But in all seriousness, I do think this is the greatest UFC rivalry of all time and one of the best storylines in combat sports history, and here's why. Our story begins in kickboxing before either of them would step foot in an octagon. And remember when I said perfect foils? Izzy started kickboxing because he was inspired by the movie Ong Bak and the want to be the best martial artist. However, Alex Pereira started his martial arts journey out of necessity. Alex grew up in the poor favelas in Brazil and dropped out of school at a young age and started working at a tire shop. There, he adopted an alcohol addiction and wouldn't be saved from it until he started kickboxing, and even then it still lingered in his life. Though these seemingly different paths would converge into one at Glory of Heroes, a kickboxing promotion in China. The first fight was very close, with both men having their moments, but Alex ultimately edging it out in a decision. So with the score really unsettled, we go into the second fight where, as we all know, Alex knocked out Izzy cold with a left hook, which changed the course of events for both fighters. With that devastating loss, Izzy would make his transition to MMA and would propel himself to superstardom. He beat Anderson Silva, went to war against Kelvin Gastelum, and topped it off with a legendary performance against Robert Whittaker, securing the belt with a picture-perfect left hook. He was truly on top of the MMA world and was looking like the face of the UFC in the post-Conor era. Meanwhile, Alex Pereira was finding success on his own path. In this same time period of Izzy's first title run, Alex was having a dominant middleweight title reign in Glory Kickboxing and eventually became a double champ there as well by winning the light heavyweight belt. Though Alex was finding a lot of success in Glory, it was not nearly on the level of fame and fortune Izzy was experiencing in the UFC. And their paths would remain separate until Israel Adesanya made a comment about Alex Pereira in a 2020 interview saying, quote, "He watches all of my fights, and every time I fight, like clockwork, he'd try to put something out like, I beat this guy. At the end of the day, no one knows who the fuck he is. He's going to be that guy when I'm world champion, when I'm a legend. He's going to be at some pub talking shit about, I beat that guy one time." And that's all it took to motivate Alex to transition into an entirely different sport and promotion to hunt down Israel Adesanya. And Alex was truly on a path of vengeance when he made his debut in the UFC. He decapitated Andreas Michailidis with a flying knee, he beat down Bruno Silva over the course of 3 rounds, and finally he finished Sean Strickland brutally with a signature left hook and right hand. Meanwhile, Izzy was taking care of business and lapping the division with wins over Jared Cannonier, Robert Whittaker for the second time, and Marvin Vettori for the second time. And so with no other contender or competition for Izzy, and history tied to this event, Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira was the only decision for the UFC to make. Despite Izzy starting to get hate for his boring performances, I still think generally Izzy was still looked at as a good guy and golden boy of the UFC, while Alex Pereira was more so seen as the villain sent to seek and destroy our main character. But I think most would agree that Izzy would still get it done. He was a -200 favorite by most odds makers and had a significant head start in the sport and head start in the fight, with Izzy winning most, if not all, of the first 4 rounds. But we all know how this ends. This would obviously set up a rematch between the two rivals, and this time it was Alex who got a good head start and almost looked like a finish, but Izzy would pull out a double right hand off the cage, this time sending Alex to the canvas cold. Izzy, for a short period of time, looked like a good guy again. He had a great post-fight interview in this fight and wished everyone would feel the feeling he had at that moment. After this fight, the two would go on separate paths again. Alex announced shortly after his loss to Adesanya that he would be moving up to 205 and fighting Jan Blachowicz, and he would look good in a split decision win against the former champion. Izzy would go on to fight Sean Strickland, but unfortunately for Izzy, didn't have that same success. Izzy would again become the bad guy. Between the Dricus du Plessis situation that happened a couple months before, the dog situation, and Sean Strickland winning the verbal war and completely dominating the press conferences to the point where the Australian crowd was rooting for Sean, it was putting Izzy back into a negative light. And to make matters worse, Izzy loses after all that shit happened in the worst possible way by getting dropped and dominated at his own game. And on top of that, he pleads guilty to a DUI around a week after. It was seriously one of the worst weeks or couple of weeks of someone's life in terms of public humiliation, and was simply the perfect storm. Shortly after, Izzy would announce that he was going to leave for a long time, and we really didn't know when he would be coming back. Meanwhile, Alex Pereira this weekend would get his 205 title shot against Jiří Procházka and become a double champ, leading back to where we started, this post-fight interview. The guy sent to hunt down Izzy turns out to be a good guy too, and now wants to help the main character out. This is literally Terminator 1, Terminator 2 type shit, a goddamn movie script. The poetic justice of Izzy now needing Alex to rescue him is just so perfect. It started with Izzy calling out Alex that led to the resurgence in Alex's career, and I keep fucking saying the word perfect, but Izzy saying that Alex was probably in some bar somewhere made Alex's post-fight interview that much more perfect when he insinuates Izzy wasn't just saving him from a bar, but his long battles with alcoholism. Like, come on, that's some beautiful script writing. I also love that the two now respect each other as competitors, with Alex saying that if Izzy does go on to take a break and doesn't fight until 2027, that would be a waste of talent. The once hero in the rivalry and the villain in the rivalry, as seen in the public eye, have switched through the course of their exciting saga, and now Alex calling out Izzy to rescue him from a dark place by fighting for the belt with Alex as champ this time completes a perfect story. And I've been talking about the story and the evolution of these two fighters because, again, it is a perfect story. But if we just simply look at the fights they produced and the impact they had on the UFC now, I think their impact is unparalleled in comparison to other UFC rivalries. First of all, their two fights produced two of some of the most shocking finishes in UFC history. Their saga in the middleweight division turned it from a boring division that was going to be headed by one guy to the ultra competitive division we see today, headed by Sean Strickland of all people. Meanwhile, at 205, those fights were able to propel Alex to the next level in the next weight class, and now we have a champion at 205 and hopefully a champion to stay. And maybe the saga continues at 205, but nonetheless, again, with this story between these two rivals, their character development, and the impact their fights has had on the sport, this is the greatest UFC rivalry of all time. So what do you guys think? I would like to hear your guys' thoughts on what the best UFC rivalry is of all time. I also want to hear about the best storylines in the sport and the UFC. But again, thank you guys for watching. Peace.